Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the thematic session 2 for the day, which will focus on achieving the energy transition, challenges and opportunities. Uh, this session will unpack the challenges facing the transition, especially in terms of implementation. Specifically, it will look at the role of finance, carbon markets, institutional arrangements and regulations in India's energy transition efforts. This session will also focus on what states are experiencing in India's energy transition story and what more needs to be done to help achieve the country's targets. For the panel discussion, I would like to invite on the stage the chair, Ulka Kelkar, Executive Director, Climate, Economics and Finance, WRI-India. Ashish Tiwari, Secretary, Department of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of Uttar Pradesh. Soumya Garnaik, Country Representative, Global Green Growth Institute. And Josey, Fellow, Prayas Energy Group. Tirthankar Mandal, Head Energy Program, WRI-India. We will also have with us Mahua Acharya, CEO, International Energy Transition Platform, who will be joining us a little later during the session.
Are you able to hear me? Good afternoon, everyone. In the morning session, Roshan from Selco Foundation talked about wanting experts who have common sense and empathy. And to this, I'll add a third secret ingredient, which is optimism. Because anybody who works on India's energy transition, the sheer scale of it and the complexity of it, cannot afford to get overwhelmed by this challenge ahead of us. So if we want experts with common sense, empathy, and optimism, I think we could not have asked for a better panel of experts. Thank you so much for being with us today. And for the audience, we know the post-lunch session is always a tricky one. So what we'll try to do is we'll have an opening round of remarks from everybody, about 5 minutes each, and then actually reach out to you for questions. So please do keep your questions ready. And then we'll come back to the experts for their second and third rounds of questions. And to the esteemed panelists, please allow me to be not just your moderator, but also your timekeeper. And I'll give you a nudge when 5 minutes are over for the first round of remarks, so that we have time for more questions from the audience and a second and third round of responses. So with this, let me start with Mr. Tiwari. So if you could share with us some of the experiences from Uttar Pradesh about how the state is tackling its clean energy transition, particularly how it is trying to access financing. And financing, especially for those types of projects which are difficult to get financing for, projects which have a social impact, could be for women's businesses, or it could be for decentralized renewable energy of other types. But we would love to hear from the pioneering work that is being done in your state. So.
Thank you very much. Ulka, like everyone will appreciate that for energy transition, like local circumstances would be very, very important. Like if, say for taking example of pumped hydroelectric storage, then probably some states may not have the potential for that. Like UP is one of them, Indo-Gangetic Plains, you don't have areas with different elevations, etc. Taking example of wind energy also, my state does not have any significant potential. So the local circumstances are very, very important, and accordingly, like for solutions, the biggest challenge, as rightly pointed out by Ulka, is the upfront investment, which is higher as compared to our fossil fuel based projects. On financing part, like we would like to mention from a state of Uttar Pradesh, 3 types of interventions which the state has taken up. One is the very, you can say, popular UP investment and employment generation policy, which has attracted very high investments in renewable energy sector, which is very important for energy transition in our country. There, I think in every newspaper and in every media, there was a groundbreaking ceremony also have taken place. First, there were MOUs, then groundbreaking ceremonies also. So it has attracted lot of investment on renewable energy projects. Of course, my state is also not having good potential for utility based solar power plants because of land, limited availability of lands, because 70-80% farmers are small and marginal farmers in the state of UP. They have very small land holdings. Only few areas in Bundelkhand, etc., which are very similar to any other peninsular state across India, they have the land parcels available. But definitely agri PV has a great scope, and of course there are challenges related to the technology credibility with floating solar power plants, canal top plants, etc. So the UP, as I mentioned, like local circumstances, has on one side has done a good study on potential of floating FPV plants, potential on agri PV, and potential on pumped hydroelectric storage also. But we appreciate and realize that for pumped hydroelectric storage, of course there is a lot of investment coming up for Vindhyan and Bundelkhand region, but really we will have to be very careful, because in one of the projects, the number of trees, it was in forest area, and the number of trees which were required to be cut around very high, some 4 lakhs trees. So we really have to, now we have decided that we would do some kind of a study that which are go areas and which are no go areas for PHP projects. So financing, like capital subsidy, tax incentives, like our UP investment policy, investment and employment generation policy is one intervention. And second, you can recently UP has come out with a green hydrogen policy. UP is probably one of the pioneer states to have done green hydrogen policy, and under that policy also very high capital incentive has been given to first 5 projects in UP, which is around 300 crores, up to the tune of around 300 crores. I may not be having the exact figure, but up to 40% capital investment with a cap is there. And because UP has a great potential for uptake of green hydrogen because of concentration of fertilizer and refinery plants in UP, so the target under this policy, which is again a capital incentive and so many other incentive based, so that target is around 1 million metric ton of green hydrogen in the state. Third is like for any kind of energy transition, like the first driver is energy efficiency, which is very important. In fact, we should not lose sight to energy efficiency, because if we talk of decarbonization, then probably we have to think in a bigger perspective, by a perspective of a net zero. So if we are working for 2070 net zero vision for India, then probably energy efficiency and other modes of reducing greenhouse gas emissions will be very important. So of course, not per se directly for renewable energy or energy transition, but on agroforestry, like the whole, you can say, the net zero pathway has banked upon something that this much of carbon sequestration will be there, but there is a larger scope to that, I'm just flagging it as an, of course, bit off track to the discussion, but I'm just flagging the strength of carbon financing. Recently, for agroforestry, UP has done carbon financing for the whole agroforestry sectors. And recently, the first tranche of carbon finance to the farmers has been distributed by our CM. And the total carbon finance which is coming to agroforestry sector is around 250 crores, which will be coming to 25,000 farmers. So that could also be, because voluntary carbon markets are also, for some solutions, they are very, very reliable. So that could also be one of the very robust financing mechanism for driving and for strengthening our energy transition in the state. And lastly, the clean cooking, like cooking sector, is also a very, very important with in the view of greenhouse gas emissions and indoor air pollution and air pollution at larger scale also. There, I think our carbon financing can play a major role. We have built up a very, very large scale project to cover about 1 million households in UP by a bouquet of solutions that will also attract carbon financing. And I am very happy to tell you that I am taking one example which will be very important for energy transition. For household based biodigester, which costs around 35 to 40,000 rupees maximum, 15 to 17,000 carbon finance is already committed by some of the partners to us, and we are having a target of 3 lakhs households. And on top of that, MNRE gives you subsidy of about 14,700. So the cost to the end user is just 5-6,000. So you can really understand the strength of carbon financing. So that would be the third pillar of financing our energy transition projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think given the size of UP and the very local challenges that you spoke about, all of these examples are very important in terms of how to achieve targets, how to make it actually happen. I'll now move to Mr. Garnaik to continue the thread that Mr. Tiwari spoke about on energy efficiency particularly. Are there any innovative business models or financing mechanisms that would be particularly applicable to energy efficiency?
Thank you, Ulka, and good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Thanks, World Resource Institute, for this invitation. Mr. Tiwari already highlighted the importance of the demand side management in the form of energy efficiency. I think this is well understood by everyone. If we see the energy intensity of our country, we have been reducing it roughly about 0.8 to 1% since last 12-15 years. And thanks to some of the couple of very flagship programs by Bureau of Energy Efficiency, Ministry of Power, which in the form of the Perform Achieve Trade Scheme, the Industrial Energy Efficiency Program, which mandated a energy saving certificate scheme. It's a market-based mechanism where the targets are given and you achieve the target. The overachievers are getting the certificates which can be sold in the market. I mean, it can be traded. So that has been quite successful, but more, if you just go deep into that scheme, what you will see that almost 12 sectors have already been added up. And fortunately, I was, managing this program when I was in Bureau of Energy Efficiency since, 12, 13 years back. And what we could see that it precisely depends upon the data. The data, that means digitalization, is one of the key factor here, where the decisions are being taken based on the information being provided by the industry. The other one is the Appliance Energy Efficiency Program, which you may be knowing about, the star rating program, the standard and labeling program, which has been very, very successful. I think over 30 equipments, appliances have been included to that. So those, but if you see the 5-star rated appliances, the larger ones, the high efficient ones, what is the market penetration to that? Roughly 20% or even less than that. If I talk upon the important appliances like air conditioners or refrigerators, etc. So rest of the things are still in the inefficiency zone, which needs to go. She asked me about the business models, and let me give my example when I manage some of the programs in Energy Efficiency Service Limited, ESL. And that is where we saw the upfront cost, which Mr. Tiwari highlighted. So in a cost-sensitive societies or consumers like ours, it becomes very, very imperative that the cost, the upfront cost should be as minimum as possible. You must have heard, I mean, saw the quite successful program in the LED program, the Ujala program, which brought the a 7-watt LED bulb from $5 to less than $1 in a span of about 4 to 5 years. And what is the model here? Nothing. It is simply a demand aggregation, economy of scale, and bulk procurement. And thanks to Energy Efficiency Service Limited, because of the nature of the Ajay and Super ESCO, they could do it. But that also, there is a negative factor to that. In that particular program, although it was successful, but that was also tried for the other appliances in the same model, which it could not be. The street lighting program, the National Street Lighting Program, which we implemented roughly about 12 million numbers of street lights, even more than that, in 1,600 ULBs. And that was a quite, it's a pay as you save model, or where the upfront cost was reduced, because again from the bulk procurement we got about 30 to 40% reduction from the cost, and with adding of all the other costs, the project management fees, the cost of financing to that, still the payback period was roughly about coming about 4 to 5 years. So in a monthly installment or yearly installment or quarterly installment, this was made, the payment was supposed to come from the ULBs. But as I managed this program, I could see that there is a loophole to this, because there was a not structured payment security mechanism. That is where the scheme, I would believe, that we failed to a certain extent. 40 to 50% of the investment, roughly we invested about 500 million or 600 million to that particular program, entire country. Saving was enormous, CO2 emission reduction was enormous, peak demand reduction to the discoms happened, but as a businessman, as an investor, it became a problem, unless otherwise you are not getting that your rest of the investment paid by the energy user, where they have the monetized energy saving. So how to put it in as a legal framework, how to put it as a structured, robust, contractual arrangement, that is exactly the same. We tried the same thing with the Telangana government also. We said that why can't it be a centralized payment mechanism? Instead of a service provider like ESL running from here to there to get their payment, why it cannot be paid from the centralized or the state budget exchequer? So whatever amendments are needed to be done, that has to be done. So what I see that business models are there, and we tried not only in the municipality sector or the lighting sector. I also led a project in the some of the MSME sector, where some of the standard energy efficient technologies were demonstrated, which has the reduction in the energy saving to the tune of about 15 to 20%. So, and the beneficiary industry has to pay back the investment which we did from the monetized energy saving. So that means the models are there. I mean, if you go for a standardized technology, going for a bulk procurement, in demand aggregation approach runs fine. But I would say that still we are struggling with two things: robust payment security mechanism. Second is the contractual arrangement, the standardized contracts documents, which will be obliged by both parties. I'll stop it here. So probably I can answer some of the questions if it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very informative. And that was indeed the link from the first session talking about the broad availability of climate finance globally, and then the scarcity of blended finance, the cost of capital, the risk perceptions. And now you're talking about specific instruments to utilize that scarce finance and to mitigate those risks. So thank you so much. I'll now move to Anne and then Tirthankar in this order. And the question to both of you is the same, really, which is that regulations and institutions have to now keep up with new ways of generating power, new ways of storing power, new ways of buying and selling power. And really, this is where regulatory change and institutional mechanisms, especially distribution companies, can make or break the energy transition. So what are some of the emerging trends that you're seeing from states? What are the emerging changes that you're seeing? And what more fundamental shifts are really required in India's states? And
it's interesting that you articulated that way, because along with WRI and Sustainable Futures Collective collaborative. We had a 2 to 3 year exercise where we were trying to understand the state level preparedness for energy transitions and what is actually happening in states when we are talking about not just having accelerating renewable energy, but also in terms of planning and institutional capacities. How do we look at the role of distribution companies, which are these vanguards for taking the energy transition forward? How are the networks coping? So those were the, how do we address concerns of reliability, equity? I mean, these are all conversations that have been happening at this conference in any case. But the point is we try to sort of understand what is happening in 10 states in India on a year-on-year basis to try and see what are the ideas that are taking place, what can be scaled, and how does that inform national policy. And some of the kind of insights that we came up with, and I think those are also themes that you've also spoken about, is at the state level, while there's a lot of action, especially in terms of signing renewable energy contracts, tendering, coming up with resource adequacy processes, etc. What we saw was at the state level, there was at least a very little action on the front of having a coordinated vision for the entire energy sector of the state. How do we have different goals? How do we move from an all of the above approach to really understanding what is the fundamental requirement for the state and how do we prioritize different options? So that seemed lacking, and that also and this is the 10 states that we looked at. And obviously now there are some, actions on that front which are picking up. But not having this articulation of a vision also meant that for investors and for consumers, there was no certainty as to how we can imagine this sector in, let's say, 10 years or 15 years. So that absence of a long-term vision also did not inform national policy, because the entire question about how do we set renewable energy targets for states. I mean, most of the conversation started when at the national level there was a order for looking at a renewable purchase obligation and compliance, the 43% target. But the truth is that many states did not have any target for 2030 based on their own demand and supply requirements. So the absence of that vision was something that we saw for the power sector as a whole. The other is the action in the states are also happening very, very rapidly. And many institutions and structures have to change to adapt to that. And one major change that we saw was with respect to the advent of green open access. Some of this is because of national frameworks changing, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that renewable energy is obviously modular, scalable, the technology is feasible now, which means that for a lot of consumers, especially commercial and industrial consumers, it becomes the option to go to directly procure from renewable energy suppliers rather than relying on distribution companies. So for them, it's a 30 to 35% savings immediately. And that economic proposition is something that many consumers will not ignore. But it also has a lot of implications for the state, for planning, and for how we look at business models of the utility itself going forward. How do we really think about procurement and planning for the distribution company? How do we look at the state meeting its reliability requirements? And most importantly, are the frameworks that were provided for promoting renewable energy to make it stand on its own economic proposition, which is where we have reached now, do they hold for the future as well? I think that's a fundamental question that distribution companies are tackling with today. So for example, the whole idea of direct procurement is given with this policy promise of providing banking. Essentially, that translates to some kind of net metering provision for all consumers. So power can be injected when solar is available, and it can be drawn without too much of a cost. It's just an in-kind cost of 8% of that energy itself. Whereas if you look at the price of power in the market, that varies from 2 rupees to 10 rupees in the same day. So the value or the cost of that service which the DISCOM is incurring is very different from the service that is being provided to the renewable energy, to the consumers, which means that these services are provided at a very, very concessional rate. And one could also argue that it is a kind of cross-subsidy that is being provided to consumers, commercial industrial consumers, which is actually being provided by the regulated consumers, the smaller consumers, the agricultural consumers, the domestic consumers that the utility is catering to. So this is a fundamental shift that needs to take place in the business model of the utility itself. if we need to have a sustainable and robust and financially viable utility in the future, which can also take part in the transitions. The other major development that we have seen is solarization of agriculture. I mean, in India, this is a major issue because 25% of our demand at the national level, I mean, aggregated, is agriculture. And a lot of it can be provided in the daytime with solar power, which means that many of the classic RE integration issues would not really be there when we're talking about providing this supply. And farmers who typically get power during nighttime can be promised daytime 8 hours of supply, which also meets their supply and service quality requirements. So it could be a win-win-win for many stakeholders, especially the state government, because this power can also be provided at half the cost, which essentially means that the subsidy requirement to agriculture can come down. But for many years, even with all the good stuff and why this program should work, it really didn't take off in many states at the scale at which we thought it would, because there were so many implementation issues on ground. And that's where really state innovation really plays as well, because even though the framework was there at the national level, some states actually try to address these on ground issues to scale up some of these programs. And I want to give the example of Maharashtra, where within a year they were able to sign contracts for 9,000 megawatts to cater to 40% of their agricultural consumers and save about 30% of their subsidies by addressing many of these implementation issues through a policy approach. So it makes sense to have a national level enabling policy, and it also makes sense to have standardization in terms of frameworks to ensure there's payment discipline, standardization, etc. But I think it's also very important to foster state innovation, because that's where really you see scaling happening. So those are the kind of insights that we found from this study that we did in 10 states. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Anne.
Yeah. So I would actually start off where Anne has left the issue, and I would like to focus on the fact that, look, there has to be government initiatives, and when I say government initiative, I specifically mean government supported finance, which we classically call it as public financing in the energy transition mix. And that public financing has to play a very specific role. It doesn't need to be yes, it can be capex and all types of other forms of incentives and all, but it has to play the role of risk mitigation to investment. There are various types of risks that are involved in the investments of this clean energy business. The public finance has to play the role of risk mitigation, be it in the large RE or large clean energy or energy efficiency kind of projects or programs. There are not all of these programs and projects have same kinds of risk. We have all seen that various kinds of investment profiles and their risks. Those public finance, now is the time that these risks have to be mapped, and the public financing has to be linked to those kind of links. That is point number one. Point number two is that if we at all map the question is that, has it not been done? Yes, it has been done. Then the question is why it has failed. The failure is actually lie in the two issues. One is that how the decisions have been made, and what is the process of interplay between the various institutions. Because when we start off with this whole thing, there are lots of institutions that are in play, and that is where I think Anne has just touched upon the various nitty-gritties of these kind of interplays of these institutions. But actually there lies what Mr. Tiwari was being focusing on, that at the state level. At the state level, some of these were being driven by typically a leader of the bureaucrats or the champion bureaucrats, which we call it, or typically in a national program, we first identify a champion of one or two champion states and try to kind of huddle around that to basically run that program. Once one or two states actually make that a successful story, that becomes kind of a model for others to follow, or something like that happens, and that actually has a snowballing effect in the country for many of these programs we have seen in the past. But that has to happen on the basis of institutional thing, and that is what it is missing, and that has to be incorporated in the energy transition context, and that is where the changes need to happen, and the changes in the terms of how the redistribution effect actually can be brought in. Once we bring in the redistribution, my third point is actually linked to this, is that once we talk about these distribution companies and all of these things, there are lots of future opportunities are there in terms of carbon markets, domestic carbon markets, international voluntary carbon markets, and all. Unless we fix the redistribution possibilities, we can't have these benefits of this thing. For example, if we don't fix the financial issues that these distribution companies are facing, this is just one of the issues that they are facing. If we can't fix them, they won't be able to get the benefits of the domestic carbon markets, let alone the international carbon market. So those are the kind of nitty-gritties that we need to figure it out. And then finally, which we want to also figure out is that, look, there are various co-benefits programs that are being operated, like PM Kusum. How do we actually make that as a useful mechanism to actually create that revenue generation structure as a new tool to actually create that, again, that revenue earning and revenue positive impact that can be created in the incentive mechanism, so that we create that framework which will ultimately create that investment and reduce the risk component in it. So ultimately we have to create all sorts of these mechanisms to have a positive impact. I stop over here because we have a new guest over here.
Thank you so much. Mahua, welcome to the panel. And you've had this unique vantage point of seeing the energy transition from both inside the government and outside the government. And having experienced the challenges and the constraints, what do you think are the new ways forward for the public sector and the private sector to combine their energies to drive this transition? If you could just make your opening remarks in around 5 minutes or so, we'll come back for more.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to see friends over here and some very familiar faces. I must just start by saying I'm just so sorry for barging in late, but I did run across my previous meeting. Energy is a very large topic, of course. Let me comment on a few things. If you're an investor coming to India and you want to put your money into, you've identified some aspect of the energy transition, and let's say you've got a big check or at least big goals, and you're largely going to be most likely an infrastructure investor, and you look around in the country, where do you put your money in? As far as renewables is concerned, if you put your money into standard PPAs, those returns are sub 8%. It's really hard to justify that. Realities are probably even lower than that, but I can see heads shaking. What else would you do? You would dress it up at the edges. And if you dress it up at the edges, you're going to put battery storage. Now, battery storage just has to come down. Those prices has to come down. Of course, CapEx have to come down. That's one. But till and until our CapEx comes down, what else can you do? And that takes me to the point on business models, which is really a response to Ulka's question. What are the business models that we have out there that an incoming investor wanting to come in on infrastructure levels is willing to sit it out for 10, 12 years and earn a flat return? Where do they put their money in? Either stuff is very expensive, meaning these are companies that are old, they're listed, they've received many rounds of funding, and if you want to come in, you have to pay a pretty heavy price. Otherwise, take mobility, which is also part of the energy transition. Where would you put your money in? You produce vehicles, or you put your money into mostly apps. And in between there is nothing right now. So what are we talking about as far as our energy transition is concerned? I get the regulatory aspects, and I loved Anne's comments on Maharashtra. That Kusum scheme is reformed through the back door, and it has to continue. It has to continue like doggedly, and we just have to keep doing it doggedly, because as far as our discoms is concerned, remember, it's like 40 years of work. 40 years of little changes after changes after changes. There's a whole big beast out there. But there are these other sectors coming up. So outside of regulatory, which is of course one big piece, where are the other areas that you would put, and what are the business models that you would back? That's number one. Do we have enough of those? Do we have companies or entities that build them? Back in the day with renewables, there used to be these things called developers. They would come in and they would build little projects that looked like that enough had been de-risked that somebody would come in and earn a return in the next round. Most industries are built like that, or many big infra. The role of government then becomes very key. And I'll just share, this is an example at the end of a year of having finished from the government. When we were conceiving, and I see all my WRI friends here, when we were conceiving of the bus project, at the back of my head, I thought, it's the easiest that you use a subsidy and you front load it. You pay the OEM, the bus manufacturer, and you say, put a bus on the road, I pay you back some money. It's the easiest. It gets a subsidy out the door and you declare victory, because that's just how a lot of public subsidy schemes run. In case it is successful, you run out of subsidy money. Then what happens? Because there's been no investment in reducing the cost of that technology, you've subsidized it. So then the role of the government really necessarily has to change. And we did a lot of, I think, very hard thinking. At least I was very clear in my head that if we have to put these buses on the road, this is infra. In my mind, it's infrastructure for our cities. That means that investment needs to look like infrastructure. And hence, these are long contracts that are fixed. They have one counterpart. You assess the creditworthiness of that counterpart, and you build it as if it's infrastructure, where the government's job is very clearly listed and the private person's job is very clearly listed. These PPP structures, I think it's time for us to bring them back. We had a lot in our roads business. We had a lot in our airports business. We made a lot of money in the airports business. I think we should really work hard to bring them back. And last anecdote, and again, WRI helped me a lot with this. We had a conference on financing buses. I can see Pawan sitting there. And I thought, how do I go and find those people out there that built, or at least did the thinking for airports and did the thinking for highways, because maybe we could borrow some business models from there. And very hard. They've gone away. I mean, very hard. And I'm thinking, here we are, just redoing the whole thing. And I hope to God there's someone in the room that will tell me this has been done 20 years before, so Mahua, don't stress. But they've gone away. It took me a lot of effort to bring one person back from IDFC who dialed in. And for those of you who remember, at that time, IDFC was doing a lot of thinking on how do we structure these business models out there. So let's not try and reinvent. I know the discom business you can't reinvent because it's so large, but business models we should really not reinvent.
Thank you so much. As promised, we'll pause to take questions from the audience. So the panelists have already given us a lot of food for thought in their first round. One hand up, another there. One more. Okay, let's take three, and then I'll wait for a lady to raise her hand because we must have equity even in questions.
Tirthankar started by saying that the way governments work is 2 or 3 states, you get it to work, gets replicated. And you mentioned Maharashtra as an amazing case study that you just talked about, and Mahua repeated it. So if you could just elaborate, how's that then being a case study which could get replicated in the other states? And Mahua, you used the term that worked because of a backdoor entry. If you could just elaborate, what did you mean by that?
We'll take the second question. So, at the back.
Thank you. My question is to Mr. Tripathi. Let me stand up so you can see who I am.
Mr. Tiwari.
Yeah. So I'm a older but a brother officer. So that's why I'm asking you a tricky question. There's something called the Central Electricity Authority that we all know about. And that says that the potential in India, existing potential in India for pumped storage is as much as 90 gigawatts. Installed capacity is somewhere in the region of 6 or 7 gigawatts. Now, sir, you mentioned that, we have a lot of problem. We can't find the land. We can't find the areas which are free. So when the CEA has assessed the potential at 90 gigawatts, I fail to understand why is the intervening 82 or 83 gigawatts held up merely because of lack of land. Because if you want to integrate renewables, the cheapest way to do it is pumped hydro today, out of the acceptable. BESS is a long ways off. It's the cheapest way, but we're not doing enough about it. My suggestion, sir, I don't know about UP, though I belong to the UP cadre myself. You may or may not be able to get the land, but why is it not possible forget about the central government. Let's think of state governments. Why is it not possible for all the state governments to get together and in a PPA partnership with the private sector and say, we are going to find and exploit this potential because we need cheap balancing power? Why doesn't UP lead the way? Because, you are the largest state in India.
Thank you, Mr. Ahluwalia. Third question.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Rahul, and my question to Mr. Tiwari as well. Mr. Tiwari, you had elaborated on how UP is not suitable for alternate energy sources, especially renewable sources, due to various restrictions. So, how exactly is UP planning to decarbonize electricity, especially when UP is also aspiring to set up various industries? It has set up various industrial parks. How do you plan to decarbonize these industries? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please, ma'am. Absolutely. Just take the mic.
What was the gender participation in your projects? To what level women were involved?
Great. So, Mr. Tiwari, would you like to start? There are a number of UP questions, but I'd welcome the others also to weigh in because the issues that they're raising cut across many states. And in fact, the question is whether other states can learn from UP as well. So we could start.
Yeah, I think UP is the largest country, sixth largest country in the world. So I think proportionately UP is attracting questions. So joke apart, coming back to the pumped hydroelectric storage, like the potential, I think we will have to look into the potential assessment by a central electricity authority, whether those environmental concerns have been incorporated in assessing that potential or not. That is like the first question which has to be seen actually. And recently International Energy Agency also, they also are having an idea for at least PHP projects. We have to come out with go and no-go areas. And UP may not be a fit state, but maybe like for utility-based solar power plants, Rajasthan is a fit state. UP may not be a fit state. So all these kinds of energy transition projects, I think they are very, very area specific. I spoke in my statement also. Coming back to like UP leading on energy transition, like the biggest path for low carbon energy transition is to have first energy efficiency in place. So that UP's, I think one more question was for UP also. We really have to be very, very practical on energy transition in our country. And particularly for a state like UP, which is heavily populated, largest number of industries in Indo-Gangetic plains, etc. So there also, I think the first driver to energy transition would be energy efficiency, and the state is taking up many steps to actually blend energy efficiency with you can say, renewable energy project. Like green hydrogen has a great potential in UP because of fertilizer plants. Secondly, the bioenergy, because UP is largely an agriculture based state. So UP has also come out with a bioenergy policy. And recently, the blending of the biopellets with coal in power plants, that regulation which NCR Commission has brought in, also gives a boost to the bioenergy policy. And for replacing coal, I think if we have better PM emission system in place, then probably the biomass is the best option. CBG plants are also coming up. So that is, I think, UP's roadmap. And UP is also having the largest number of cogeneration power plants, because UP is largely a sugar producing state. So that is also, and the press mud is also available. So that is a kind of roadmap, but definitely we need a very, very comprehensive roadmap for every state, and so as with UP. Thank you.
Mahua, would you, Mr. Garnaik, would you like to also address some of the questions that you heard?
Sure, I can respond to that backroom thing, back door. I'm assuming I came in when Anne was talking. I'm assuming this is the feeder level solarization. The backroom comment was because, we've got a lot of land at our feeders, at our substations. And they were kept there, bought at the time for expansion in the future. That land is still, the land is still available. And it's not the best in the sense that sometimes it's not a clean and neat square or clean and neat rectangle, but outside of that, it's available for small little installations of solar. And if you can put some battery there as well, you can probably put a little bit more power in the nighttime hours, depending on the space and the need. That you can, in fact, provided land acquisition has been done properly, you reduce the cost of acquisition of power to the DISCOM significantly. You're generating at 3.5 rupees, maybe 4, let's be generous. And you're generating at the substation level. So the cost of acquisition then and the average cost of power supply comes down tremendously. And nobody else is getting affected, right? The overall power purchase on the DISCOM level comes down, that overhang reduces. The problem, however, is just this same old India problem. It is so difficult to get land. It is just so difficult to get land. And then going back to some of our other success stories, if there was somebody who were able to just to map them all out, clear out their titles, perhaps do this in a more wholesale level and then auction it out, I am very sure the prices will be significantly lower. And I think that's part of the development work that one will really have to do, because our plain vanilla PPAs no longer is not. There isn't that much more in the short term availability.
Yeah, thanks. I think let me just add or reiterate what Mr. Tiwari said about, again, from the demand side, the energy efficiency part. I think this is the single largest measure to avoid the energy demand, and this provides a pathway to our net zero goals. So one of the things, apart from the various initiatives with the various economic sectors are taking to ensure the energy efficiency, the one point is that how we can more and more electrify the operations. But that means that is the where we can ensure the decarbonization, considering the fact that our energy mix is changing, where more and more renewable energies are coming into the supply side. So this makes sense if you go more into the electrification. Let me just give the example of the industrial sector again, and where we are doing a study for Bureau of Energy Efficiency, supporting them to identify what is the potential of electrification possible further in the industrial sector. Today's statistics says about 19%, 20% of the total energy consumed in the industry is from the direct electricity. The rest of the things are going towards the fossil fuel. So that gives what's a food for thought, how we can change from say 19%, 20% to 40%. Why we should go to that? Because as we know, theoretically, technically, all the actions, all operations in the electricity are more efficient as compared to the thermal energy and all. So that is why the Go Electric Bank campaign per se, if you see, we are focusing to going to the clean cooking or the the electrified cooking or electrified transportation system. So also in the industries. So that's a way we have to do. But we do not know how the heating or the drying or these kind of operations, how that can be possibly changed into the electrification side. So if we see a horizon of 5 years to 10 years, 8 years in the line, and we see a paradigm shift in renewable energy coming into the grid structure, then where that electricity is going to be used, that is also another point, considering the fact that there is a storage system in place, or if not, then how this energy is to be utilized during the time when the energy is available, particularly from the solar side and all. So this is a point where a deep dive study is required, analysis is required, just to give the input to the government that how this electrification aspect can be taken care of, considering our entire energy scenario in place.
I just wanted to respond to the question about Maharashtra experience. I think one crucial aspect was it learned from some of the earlier programs, like many other states. So the earlier projects for solarization for agriculture was to give the solar panel to the farmer itself. And obviously there were a lot of operational issues there, and you're expecting someone who's not an expert in solar to be responsible for that asset. And it was mostly grant-based. But then the idea was to scale it up and focus more on the distribution company. And one of the major innovations, which also became part of the Kusum scheme, was to do it at the megawatt scale level rather than at the kilowatt scale level. So it is at a feeder, and it caters to all the farmers who are connected to that particular feeder, which could be thousands of farmers at a go. Which obviously brings in the economies of scale, and administrative and procedural requirements also reduce. But I think Maharashtra didn't stop there, because many other states, Rajasthan, MP, etc., Gujarat, they all went in that direction. What Maharashtra did after that was to again learn from the experience on the ground and realize that many of the distribution transformers, many of the feeders needed upgradation, especially to allow for the solar plant to be installed there. Land was a definite challenge. So how do you really aggregate land at scale? If the ambition is at, because the stated ambition, that was another important part of Maharashtra. It was not just part of that scheme. They came out with a mission called 2025 Mission 2025, where we would want to at least have 35% of agricultural solarization within the next 2 years. Right? So that kind of coordinated, concerted effort from the government, and that ambition, that stated goal of going in that direction, made a big difference, especially in bringing in all the systems to identify land parcels that could be used for this, which were already with the DISCOM or were very, very close to the substations. Have planned sort of mapping of how much of this augmentation work can happen, actually carve out funds in order to provide to the distribution company to make some of these system upgradation works possible, address many of the local level challenges. There was also a fund created for villages around these projects, for other works in those villages, given that the land was being provided. And also having a revolving fund for developers. Many of these projects are 2 to 10 megawatt scale. So it's quite likely that some of the developers who come are much smaller developers or first-time developers. So to actually address some of the working capital issues that they might have with delayed payments, etc., to have a revolving fund to address some of this. So, really like getting into the nuts and bolts, nitty-gritty issues, rather than having a policy goal, was essentially what Maharashtra did. And that concerted effort, by multiple teams to make sure that that 9 gigawatt was realized, made it one of the largest decentralized projects perhaps in the world, in such a short span. So that's why it's an experience that should be celebrated. I just wanted to also sort of very quickly respond to Mahua. I think the DISCOM's role will effectively have to change, whether we like it or not. And I think that is more because of the circumstances and the way the energy transition itself is playing out. If consumers have a choice to migrate away from the distribution companies, and that is going to affect their finances, it means that the role of the DISCOM is already changing, whether there is a policy effort to change it or not. I mean, essentially, the state's demand is not the distribution company's demand anymore. We already have consumers procuring through third-party options. The standard cross-subsidy model that we talk about in the Indian power sector, where industrial and commercial consumers cross-subsidize the residential and agriculture. We're already seeing that that is not happening in many states. In fact, in the Energy Transition Preparedness Initiative, we were clearly able to see that actually the commission tariffs, the tariffs that are determined for, let's say, states like Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan, the agricultural tariffs are at 80% of the cost of supply, right? So essentially, it's not cross-subsidy that is going to agricultural consumers or to domestic consumers, it's subsidy. The state government is taking on that role of replacing subsidy with cross-subsidy. And as I said, how do we really look at cross-subsidy? How do we define cross-subsidy itself if many concessional services are being provided to these consumers who are migrating as well? So I think that's a big role change as well. And also about network. I mean, if many consumers, there are many suppliers at various levels using the same network, how do we really look at network planning? How do we really look at consolidating and decentralizing that planning? How do we really do it at a circle level also becomes very important. So I think we really need to innovate in terms of looking at DISCOM rules because it's unprecedented. There is no sort of lesson from the reform era that we can use to address future challenges. Thanks.
Thanks. I wonder if I might take Madam's question and actually share it with all of the panelists, whoever may choose to, and maybe broaden that a little bit. The question was specifically about participation of women, gender participation. But if you could, based on your experiences, highlight a few good examples or approaches of how to ensure that India's energy transition is beneficial for women. Or if you might want to broaden that and talk more generally about the vast informal unorganized sector, it'd be really nice to hear some of those responses. Mahua, I wonder if, I always love your example of the women drivers, but there might be others as well. Please.
I'll tell you about the women drivers, and then I'll also tell you about the washrooms. Again, for the benefit of the audience, when we were designing the bus program for the country, at least I was at a personal level, I had this sort of conviction that if you don't do it right this time around, we will again lose another 10 years of time. We'll also lose unnecessary social stigma that we will continue with. So we introduced a requirement in the tenders for electric buses that 25% of them have to be driven by women. 25% of bus manufacturing have to be by women on the shop floor, and that shop floor thing has to go up. But we all knew very well that 25% women, not probably going to be possible. So not that details matter too much in this crowd, but I should tell you that it was part of the tender, but not part of the contract, although the contract was floated as part of the tender. However, when you get responded in the tender, you get evaluated on tender conditions. So of course, everybody came in. And then we learned, I also knew this at the back of my head, but we all wanted them to think, them meaning the market to think, market and governments. And I'll tell you, to get a heavy motor vehicle license for a bus, I'm not even talking about trucks, you need to have driven a bus for 1 year, and you need to be of a certain height. And that eliminated women completely. So Delhi was going through this change, which is how I knew about it. Other states had already gone through the change. And let's leave the social part aside, but it took us months of a lot of my time, many hours of going through details, files, transferring of those files, approving of those files. Nobody actually is going to disapprove something like this, but unless you follow it through, it's such a small piece. But if you don't follow it through, you have now eliminated 2 drivers per bus for 25,000 buses in the country at a total investment size of 5 billion. That's just the drivers. Now, of course, you don't have schools. Schools have never trained drivers before. Women have never gone to schools. So someone has to look after that. So it's okay to make that announcement at the top. It's a little harder to hang on to it and stay with it, but it's really hard to implement it. I'll give you another one which we failed at. We were doing long distance buses, and we were quite sure that long distance buses, you're going for about 4 hours and then you have to stop. There are no washrooms in long distance buses. Most, I think, buses in India don't have washrooms. And if there is a washroom, it's a unified washroom, which means that you lose some seats, and when you lose some seats, the operator starts complaining that the fares come down. But we couldn't win that battle. And we had it in the tender, I brought it back in the tender, and then we had to drop it. Because we are not ready as a country, as an industry, as manufacturers, and most importantly, as operators, because everybody said, I can't keep it clean. And if we can't keep it clean, then I can't run that bus because nobody's going to go into a stinky bus.
Tirthankar, would you like to?
I would like to highlight the very fact that we have been a very, like the whole community, social sector has been till now has been a very staunch supporter of microfinancing, because I bring up this issue of microfinancing because it has a very strong relationship with the distributed renewable energy sector, because everybody, when they find some problem area, they jump to the solution of microfinancing. But all said and done, microfinancing doesn't come at all a cheaper solution, right? And given the fact that it is well documented in peer reviewed literature and all types of literature that women SHGs are the most reliable paymasters of microfinancing in the microfinancing world, right? And if you put these two combinations in one bracket, then it becomes that. And also one more factor is that if women SHGs are the most reliable paymasters, it is also the fact that they don't have much of disposable incomes that we often who are sitting in the room has, right? So a large chunk of their money, with a 17 to 23% interest bracket per month of their income going for payment of these loans or rolling of this loan, goes into this. We can imagine how much of their disposable income is going forward to. So putting these two into one bracket, we can imagine how costly are these DRE loans going to be if we are getting it through SHGs. Now, we always also, on the other hand, we know that there is NABARD, there is state finance corporations, and all of those, even different states have finance ministries, they run for special loans for women. And SEBI also, not the SEBI, I think the SEBI also runs soft loans as well for these small scale DRE financing as well. So if we put in some sort of aggregated financing models for combining these three agencies, or three or four, all these alternative agencies, I'm sure these 17 to 23% operational rate of interest can actually be brought down. It needs some kind of, as Mahua said, it needs getting into the files and guidelines and all of those things. It's just that we are not doing it because of time constraints or whatever constraints that are there, but it can be done. It's not a rocket science, it just needs alignment of different guidelines of these institutions with these things. So it's not just the policy, policy is there, it's the institutional alignments that needs to happen.
Mr. Tiwari.
Like, I will cite an example of a state of Uttar Pradesh. Last year, there was a drive from the government that our budget should be green tagged. The whole budget for a state of Uttar Pradesh, we did green budget tagging, and at the same time, the Women and Child Welfare Department was also given a task for pink tagging of the budget. And the pink budget is still under process. It will come out. Green budget tagging has already been done. So there is a lot of sensitivity and there is a lot of balancing in the state policies also towards for becoming gender sensitive. I'll cite an example of, like, we were facing a very hard challenge that how to basically take forward our clean cooking program at a scale in the state of Uttar Pradesh for our clean air project for which we are working. So we thought of many options, but when we came across the state rural livelihood mission success on various fronts, whether it is realization of electricity bills in the feeders, whether it is microfinancing, BC Sakhi, and Prime Minister also mentioned Lakpati Didis and all. So that we started studying that particular framework for implementation, and we found that for clean energy access and clean energy transition for household cooking, I think this is probably the best system. We have adopted the success at pilot scale achieved by Bihar on this, and also we have adopted many successes here and there in other states, and we are trying to develop a completely woman self-help group driven this intervention, which will rely upon development of women entrepreneurship at the village level for delivery of clean cooking solutions. And you all know that there are 7 8 types of solutions, and coupled with carbon financing and various incentives like biogas as incentive from MNRE, the end user cost is also very low, and the profitability, the business model is also on a positive side. So we have lots of hopes on this particular intervention in the state of Uttar Pradesh. Thank you.
I think power sector is often seen as a very centralized, large kind of sector, and how do you really bring women into the decision-making process in such large centralized sectors where there are multiple people operating? How do you bring in that gender dimension has always been a challenge. And I think their representation is really important. And just having women, more and more people who are different, who are diverse, who are not just men who are engineers as part of the planning processes are very, very crucial and critical. And I think, just even within my career in the power sector, which is about 13 years, I've seen a huge change and shift in that. And probably that's because a lot more women are also being part of STEM education. They're getting interested in environment and climate change issues. So, I do see a lot of co-travelers, and I celebrate that, and I hope that continues. In fact, half of the researchers who worked on this project were women. So that's great. I hope it's much more going forward as well. But I think even within utilities, having more representation and more diversity really helps. I can give the example of some of the utility lead professionals who are women who I've had conversations with, and the way they look at issues is also a little different. Like there was one utility professional who I had spoken to who's managing an entire circle, and she had to figure out how to shed load because they were having shortage at that time. And this was during the examinations for many of these school children who were giving their board exams. And she saw that as a priority and went and spoke to all the industries and said, look, during the evening you have to reduce your load because these kids have to study, they have to pass their exams. To take that kind of initiative and actually go and speak to consumers who are seen as important for cash flow, and have that conversation is really important. So this is just one of those examples where I feel like having diverse perspectives really helps in sort of achieving multiple goals as well. Thanks.
I think very good examples have already been cited. Just coming one thing to my mind is 2018 and 2019, there was a solar study lamp project of MNRE. That was implemented in 5 states: Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Odisha, Jharkhand, and Assam. So idea here was there to how we can provide a solar study lamp to the school going children who in any case were using the kerosene during their evening time studies and all. So this was almost a fully funded project. 70 million was the kind of numbers of the study lamps to be distributed. When we designed this project and proposed this proposal to MNRE, I was in ESL at that point of time. MNRE, and we said that the famous bulk procurement, economy of scale, we can bring down that cost from 1,000 rupees to 500 rupees, etc., etc. MNRE said what is new in this particular design of the program. And it was initially rejected, but somehow what we could do there, we said that no, we will not purchase the entire appliance as such, but we'll purchase the the parts which are involved in that, the circuit, the solar panel which is in to it, and the entire all the parts which are involved. So these were non-assembled parts, but now the point is that who is going to assemble that? So that is where we induced that this would be assembled by the women with certain assembly and distribution centers which are created in all the five states, and they were given training. IIT Mumbai was our partner to under this project, and these women, they were able to assemble about 30 to 40 lamps in a day, and they were getting about 11 to 12 rupees per lamp which they will be assembling. And they were also making the distribution. So for every distribution they are getting about 2 to 3 rupees payment. So what we could see that we translated that assembly and distribution activities to the women, and that is the moment we are going for more and more similar kind of, whether it is solar side interventions, the charging infra related infrastructure, where more localized manufacturing or assemblies are required. Probably there is a possibility to explore the uses of the local women there as in the entire ecosystem. The second is that the quality assurance. When we go for purchasing so many procurement of large things, who is going to do the quality assurance check or pre-dispatch inspections? So particularly there, I think there is a scope for the women to be trained in that particular manner, and these are soft activities which can then do if we consider this type of energy efficiency related projects to be in place.
Thank you very much, and indeed thanks to all the panelists for very thoughtfully and detail answering this question. I think all of you have highlighted different aspects: tenders and mandates on the one hand, public budgets, private microfinance models, representation, education and skilling. And I think this is true of a number of different challenges, not just a challenge of gender. But we do have time for more audience questions, so happy to see if there are questions still there. Any others? If you could raise your hands, we'll come to you with the mic. And after the whole round of gender questions, we have to have more questions. I'm going to put the pressure on the audience. Could I see one or two more hands before we start with the questions?
Yes, my basic question is that we are finding that a lot of new emerging technologies is coming. For example, artificial intelligence, data centers, etc., and which are going to use a lot of energy. We are finding that according to one analysis, the energy as compared to France is going to be required by 2030. So how is that going to be? The entire load is going to be taken up by these renewables. And we are also finding that that as far as the imports of fossil fuels are concerned, they are only rising, because the lack of infrastructure and the lack of at this point of time, as far as OEMs are concerned, they are not in fact very much into it, maybe because there's huge lot of capex, because in solar energy we are looking only at 2 rupees, 1 rupee, but that's totally immaterial. That's irrelevant because capital expenditure is massive as far as solar infrastructure is required. So how do you address these
Thank you. Any other questions? I do have a question of mine for the panelists, but let's just see if there's anyone else. I will come back to you. Yes, please.
Hi. I would like to ask the question about recycle and waste management concepts that you guys are discussing. Majority of the research which has been done in the world has been already been done by a guy called Nikola Tesla. The guy migrated from Russia to America, and most of his research was done before 1940. And his assistant and researchers, they all had these documents classified before he passed out, before the end of the Second World War. My question right now to you guys is, how many of you guys would like to vouch back to the steam engines and steam cars? Because the patent of these technology has already been secured before First World War. And most of us are using those fossil fuel waste technology or concept is because of the sheikhs and rest of the people, those who had vested interest in First World War and Second World War to centralize the powers. What do you think about that? Because majority of the patents of recycle and waste management, especially on eco-friendly technology, was covered before First World War. We are wasting time for more than 1.5 century now, 1.25 century now. What do you think about that?
Ma'am has a question here in front, unless there's anyone else in the back as well. The same lady here.
My question is to Mr. Tiwari. You are promoting electric cooking under that clean air shed program. What is the rate of success? How do you find it? Because I also am involved. I was involved in the training for the trainers in the Skill Council for Green Jobs for the sales and maintenance role. So what are you doing for capacity building? Because it is just good to give the stoves, but as a follow-up, what sort of capacity building or role you're giving? Thank you.
So you've heard the questions from the audience. I have one question of mine to add, which is about carbon finance. Mr. Tiwari spoke about it in his opening remarks. But if we are to look at carbon markets as a source, as one more stream into blended finance, then what institutional arrangements need to change in order to be able? Is there anything that needs to be changed? So these are the 3 or 4 questions. I would suggest you take your pick of the questions that you want to respond to, and we'll wrap up. Maybe we'll start from this side this time. Mr. Garnaik, you can. Yeah? Okay. Anne, would you like to?
I can actually take the carbon markets question.
Okay, sure.
I think one is, of course, I think there's a lot that we can learn from other countries. And I particularly find China's example fascinating because they had 9 pilots over a long period of time before actually launching it full scale. And India is talking about having its pilots for carbon markets. And I think some of the challenges really boil down to 3 big aspects in my mind. And one is, of course, what is the ambition that we have in terms of targets? There has to be clarity in terms of that ambition, whether, even if you're talking about PATs or RPOs, etc., what is that ambition that we have in terms of long-term targets? For investors, what is the level of certainty that we have for the long term? I think that's another very, very critical question. And how strong are our enforcement mechanisms? When we have these targets, are the penalties strong enough? Are those enforcement mechanisms strong enough? Because if all these 3 things are in place, then it provides for an environment where trading can take place. But if enforcement is not strong enough, there is not, that certainty is not there, or even if our ambitions are too low, which means we'll have oversupply of different credits, all of those could lead to challenges. So from an institutional perspective, I think focusing on these 3 would be very critical now that we are launching our pilots. And I also feel there needs to be a lot more clarity in terms of what is the relationship between the voluntary as well as the compliance market. Because right now we're talking mostly about the compliance market, which is very well defined, but the voluntary market is not so well defined. And there are many aspects which can come there, some of which have not even been codified or quantified. And how does that really play into the compliance market is also a very big challenge, especially when it comes to looking at enforcement and how these credits can be met. So that's what are my thoughts.
She has already left. She has already left.
Oh, okay. So
So you don't want to? Sure.
I'd actually try and attempt the circularity question. Look, the way we look at circularity is that most of the attempts of circular economy is currently at the end of the life. So we want to actually look it into the context of resource efficiency, which is essentially look at into the whole production chain, right from the extraction till the end of life. Thereby you reduce 2 things. One is footprint of the decarbonization across all the levels, and the second thing is that you increase your efficiency of the material, pure materials at all the levels, like right from the extraction level to processing to the end product. And there is also the second component which we often miss is the second use or second life use or whatever it is called technically, but essentially it is the second use. So all of these 4 things put together is the resource efficiency framework, which needs to be looked into. And that is where this whole circularity business has to come in place, and that is where all these incentives and all of these things, finally we need to put in the context of the very clearly, we need to look into the framework of the fact, we need to keep in mind that this sector is essentially a clean energy transition sector. The solutions that this sector is actually being provided from the sectors who are basically providing the clean energy technologies. And if you actually be punitive to this sector, then the interest of producing more and more clean energy technologies or advanced clean energy technologies are going to go down the trend. So we need to be creating a positive momentum or a positive narrative for this sector. That's, I end over here.
Let me just take that recycling comment a little further. I'll put a financing lens to it because this is the topic of this panel, but I think I also know you have a battery event later in the day. After this event.
After this session.
After this session. I'll just put a financing lens to it. Of course, it's really good to recycle batteries, and it's always good to recycle everything, fundamental. But outside of the good, there are two ways you can incentivize this in the market. Either the policy encourages you and pays you an additional price for it, or the government mandates it. In the absence of that, what else can the government do? And I say government in this case, what else is needed in order for us to get a market for repurposed batteries? And the repurposed batteries either are coming from the power sector and back to the power sector, or they're coming from mobility sector and into the power sector, or they're coming from lead acid, meaning old mobility stuff, into the power sector. You know what's missing out there right now for large capital to come in is we don't have a safety protocol for handling repurposing. And I'm fairly sure that without any other kind of monetary / fiscal anything being spent, any expenditure on the part of the exchequer, if we had a strict, transparent, properly enforceable safety protocol, that this is how you handle the repurposing, this is the repurposing framework, a lot of capital is wanting to come in, willing to come in. That technology for repurposing is out there. From a financial lens, the cost of power production comes down by about 30%, 35%. Our rural electrification suddenly looks quite different. In an incremental marginal space at the feeder, at the substation level, I can put a used battery. There's about 500 villages out there who could really do with some streetlights at night. And I'll reduce the load on the state or the municipality that pays the tariff for streetlights. I mean, there are any number of these things you can do quite innovatively. And so back to business models, where will money come in? And what do we need? In this case, I'm very sure we need a safety protocol. Okay. Would you like to?
Yeah, just to add one question regarding this satisfactory level or the success of this induction cook stove program, which Mr. Tiwari will highlight definitely for its state. But I'm just going back to the similar project which did in Andaman Nicobar 3-4 years back. 100 numbers of families were provided with the induction cook stove directly fed from a rooftop solar system with battery provisions, with the inverter system, etc., etc. So we did a survey of that. I mean, it was a quite successful program. Again, with IIT Mumbai, we did this project. But after 2 years or 2.5 years, we did a survey, and we could see that the success rate was less than even 50%. In terms of what does it mean? I mean, the system were either not operational, or if it is operational, it is not going into the practice the way it has been intended for. That means the behavioral change of these people are not happening to use that particular system. I believe the other states which are going in a massive way of in this cooking program, they have to give attention has to be given how to do a kind of survey or a pre-implementation or post-implementation verification to see the efficacy of this entire system.
Yeah. So I think what Mr. Garnaik has said, I'll take it forward. Our take on induction cook stove is little low in our bouquet of solutions for clean cooking because of two reasons. One is, of course, for every clean cooking solution, a behavioral change is required. That is why we have relied upon a very robust system of women self-help groups driven by a state rural livelihood mission. But largely, the cost involved, and if your induction cook stove has a battery backup, then every 4th year you will have to change your battery. So the cost concerns are very, very high. So that is why it's there in our bouquet of solutions, but definitely there are other solutions which are very, very preferred by the end users. We are leaving it to the end user, and there are certain other issues in rural households with respect to the electricity wiring in the houses, because there is a load factor attached to induction cook stoves. So, but there are so many other solutions which are very, very adaptable and which are very, very preferred. One is the small biodigester tube. Now that drum based biogas technology is an age old technology. Now very smart technology has come up. So people are in the state of Uttar Pradesh, they are preferring that. If you have 3-4 livestock in your house, very smartly, of course at community level the biogas plants has not shown any success in our country, but at household basis it has shown some success. Then there is a ethanol cooking also, then improved cook stove also, which is forced draft induced cook stoves, which are available free of cost out of carbon financing only. And then the new intervention of IOCL, which works on thermal storage technology, which is called solar Nutan. There is a thermal storage plate. There are certain drawbacks because it cooks slow, but definitely its cost is very less, and it can overcome the challenges of a battery based induction cook stove and all. So these are the bouquet of solutions which will definitely, but complete adoption to LPG will be there when there is a increase in the income level of the households. This is what NFHS also shows, and all statistics. And there will always be some stacking because of availability of the feedstock for cooking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of all the organizers, may I give a very, very warm thank you to all the panelists for very generously sharing from your experiences, and not just talking about your successes, but also your failures. We really appreciate that. And thank you to a very engaged audience. Please do feel free to catch them over coffee and continue the conversation. Thank you.